Kristin Masters, we're so excited to have you coming to NVC Academy and doing a course with us. And I'm curious, why are you excited about your upcoming NVC Academy course, Dealing with Loss, Coming Back to Life? I mean, most people don't get excited about dealing with loss.
It's true. Most people don't get excited about dealing with loss. And yet, one of the things that seems so true to me is that when we actually get support to deal with our losses, we can show up as more present and free in the rest of our life. So it's almost like we're carrying these things around like big weights. And when we get some support, especially when we get to do that support in community, then that load lightens and we get to have a sense of being more available for everything else that comes. So it's that delightful experience of not being alone with something that I think is central to our healing and our living, really. I recently listened to the last time that I did this course, and found myself delighted at the comments that people made while they were experiencing it. And it left me with an even stronger desire to do grief work as often as I can. So, and on the Academy, the exciting thing about that is that there are people from all over the world. So people who wouldn't normally be sitting in the same room are sitting in the same virtual room and finding learning and support from one another. And that is a thrilling experience, really.
This idea of support in community, being able to lighten our load, and I'm envisioning, doing grief work in community, and I've heard from others and from myself that grief work is internal and solitary, and I'm really curious how this might work in a Zoom video conference format where we're together in a virtual world.
The format that I use, because I have a really high value on engagement, I tend to ask some questions to kind of set up a little bit of a framework, and then have people go off into dyads or sometimes triads to be able to consider a question and an inquiry, and then come back and share. So people get a lot of opportunities to not just sit in the whole circle and listen, but instead they get a chance to take small bites, little incremental questions that they get to consider, and they get to see what's there for them. When they do that, then that works, in my experience, that works both for people who only want to share with like one other person. That feels like a big enough step forward. And also people get to share when they come back into the whole circle. And so that works for people who feel more comfortable sharing in the whole. People end up with a lot of choice about how to do that. And when I was listening to previous recordings, I really heard a lot of people say, wow, what that last person shared was exactly in line with my experience. Or what that last person shared really invited me to a new place that I'd never considered going. So when we sit all by ourselves in our houses or in our beds or wherever it is, with our own losses, then we don't get the value of other people's wisdom, of other people's insights, of other people's explorations around what is it that I need to be able to keep walking my path, my journey of this loss. So, and if you look at other cultures, or cultures, if you go back, people always did their grief work in community. That's not to say that they didn't do some of it by themselves, but they always did, had a sense that the whole community held that they had a loss, even if they were small ones.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the image of, working together to support ourselves and each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kristin, I'm curious, do your personal experiences contribute to your passion for grief work?
Yeah, they do. For about, I'd say 15 years, I've been singing with a group called Threshold Choir, and we sing at bedsides. We sing when people are going across the thresholds of life. So that has been a really formative kind of community in my life. That goes together with a lot of experience working with Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, where I really learned that that goes together with doing other bodies of work, including Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, and some social justice work that I did, where I became aware that if you don't deal with your broken heart, then you don't show up with all you have to show up. So, so all that work was there. And then 4.5 years ago, my partner was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And I got a whole new schooling on how to deal with grief. We walked her through her last 8 months of her life. And so my experience of leading people through grief work for 20 years suddenly was enriched by my own deeper experience. It's not that I hadn't had losses before, but that was a really significant one. And it really gave me a new commitment, a new sense of, oh, I want to be there to have other people have that sense of solid support, something to lean into when they have a loss.
Sense of solid support, something to lean into.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, Kristin, we've scheduled your course for January. Starts on January 18th.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how that's going to work. Do you think January is a good time for dealing with grief work?
I love that question. January is a perfect time. I mean, here, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, there will be people who will join us from other places in the world. Winter has got that sense of like the days are shorter, the nights are longer, maybe it's colder. And so we have more kind of reflective time. We have more time to kind of hunker in, and we're not as excited to be outside all of the time, late into the night, doing outdoor activities. And so we've kind of hunkered down, put a fire in the fireplace, and really be able to kind of slow down, to be with ourselves around whatever it is that we've lost. So January is ideal. It just has that, it has the extra piece of our calendars start in January. And so we often have that sense of setting an intention for the rest of the year. This doesn't have to be that intentional in a certain way, but I really encourage people to take this time to be at the beginning of the year, in the colder time of the year, and reckon with where your heart is and where you need support.
All right, Kristin, what are people likely to receive if they take your course?
This is what I hope they get a chance to really tap into. One is a grown understanding of the reasons that you sometimes avoid grief. When you understand what has you hold it at bay, what has you avoid it or change the channel essentially in your mind, then you have a sense of more compassion for yourself in the times that you do that, because the reasons are real and big and shared. That's one thing. Why do I not go there? The second thing is, what happens when I don't go there? When I have some heartache that's there and I don't let myself grieve, we really find out what the patterns are that we fall into. Some of those are addictive patterns. Some of those are blame and depression and grumpiness and all kinds of things like that. So when you have a kind of reckoning with what you do when you don't grieve, then you have this revolutionary sense of, oh, that's what I do. Maybe I'm more motivated to actually go ahead and be with my grief or my heartache instead of doing those patterns that are often the things that we criticize ourselves about. The third thing is that we have a supported look at the inventory of the heartbreak of various kinds in our life where we weren't held, so we can go back and rescue our past selves from holding those old pains. So once you know the easy kind of ways to invite yourself to be with grief, then you can do that about things as they come up. Again, as I was listening to a past recording, someone said that from week 1 to week 2, that they had something that happened that just irritated them. And they would have normally, they knew what they would normally have done, that they would have sat and criticized and written a nasty email and things like that. And instead, they invited themselves to just notice, well, where is my heart broken about this? And it changed the entire path of how they interacted with themselves and the other person. So little things like that, it's an amazing thing. And then 4 is the actual experience of taking small bits of your grief and finding relief and healing. Finding out that it's not so overwhelming, that it isn't deadly, and that it can actually be revolutionary to have a different relationship with yourself that way. That's what I hope people get. That's what they often get when I gather people in a real room or a virtual room.
That sounds lovely. So that brings me to a question of, I'm curious, who would most benefit from taking your course?
I think people benefit if they have losses where they weren't accompanied. In my mind, I can't imagine that doesn't exist in every human being, unfortunately, because of the way that we set up our social worlds. So anybody who would like more tools and willingness to hold themselves and others when they are facing a loss, when you struggle with other people's grief, then there's often a sense that if you can turn the crank a little bit on dealing with your own, then there's space opened up to deal with somebody else's and not take it so personally and not try to convince them out of it or problem solve, things like that. Anybody who believes that life is a series of celebrations and mournings, I love that that invitation that we get from NVC, that really that's what it is, a series of celebrations and mournings. So if we can get, if we have a little bit of support to deal with our own mournings, then we can have the whole pie, the entire yin yang, all of it.
I'm getting from that, Kristin, the idea that, people who are knowingly dealing with grief would be welcome in this course. And people who may not have a particular grief in mind could also benefit in this course.
Absolutely. Yeah, for people who come to it because they want to have some sense of how do I deal with this stuff? How do I deal with mine and how do I deal with somebody else's? How do I even deal with people's snarkiness around unmet needs? Because that's really grief. If you can meet it in a certain way, then you can, it's easier for us. I don't know about you, but dealing with people's complaints, I have to really use my resourcefulness if somebody's just complaining and whining about something. But if I can hear that complaint and that whine as their heartbreak, as their longing for something beautiful, then I have a lot more space to be able to hear them. So from an NVC perspective, applying this kind of grief work to our ways of hearing one another, ourselves and one another, then it increases the spaciousness to be able to hear stuff that you don't want to hear.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm even more thrilled after having talked to you a little bit about this course. I'm even more thrilled to have it coming up for us in January. It'll be 6 Thursdays from 12 to 2 p.m. Pacific time, starting on January 18th and ending on March 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to it too, Robin. Thank you for the opportunity to work through NVC Academy, to be able to reach, like I said, those people in who knows where. We'll all get to show up together.